On November 21st, 1964, the Verrazano Narrows Bridge, built by the Triborough Bridge and Tunnel Authority, was officially opened.
To say what it's like to be in a household where bridges are being built is a little difficult to explain. I think we all went on with our lives. Father certainly did a lot of his homework in the evening, late until the night. The one thing I can remember is that when he finished his work at his desk, he would carefully clean the desk, put all his papers away, everything straight, and the final was when he closed the drawers of the desk. You would hear the closing sound, and we knew Father's ready to come and talk to us. He was very, very fond of gardening and proud of his vegetables. When Father was working on design for the Verrazano Bridge, which he was doing at home, he showed it to my mother, or actually it was my stepmother, and she looked at it and she very tactfully said, but you know, Othmar, you shouldn't repeat yourself. This looks more like the George Washington Bridge with the open work on it. Maybe it would be nice to make it modern with a solid tower. And she sketched off in her untrained way. And Father looked at that, went back to the drawing board, and came back with a sketch which is now the designs which are the actual ones that were used for the tower. He always referred to the tower as hers. At the time of the opening of the bridge, all the workers were given a medal. It came in a nice little box, and Father had put a note on the top of the box. My fellow worker, he wrote on the card. She was so pleased with the medal that she had a loop put on it and wore it as a medallion. Father's connection with Moses was over a period of more than 30 years. On and off, I think Father and Moses worked, the first was with the Triborough Bridge, and then, of course, with the Verrazano Bridge, and also the Throgs Neck.
I started out with the American Bridge Company on the Throgs Neck Bridge. 1959, I was only 22 years old, and I stayed with the American Bridge Company and went to another job. We went to the Prospect Expressway, waiting to go to the Narrows Bridge. And then my job at that time then is I was in charge, I was called a walk boss, which meant that I was in charge of one segment of the bridge from the Brooklyn Tower saddle, which is where the cable passes over the tower, down to the Brooklyn anchorage, to where the other end of the cable attaches to the eye bars, and to where the spinning equipment is. And there's an apparatus called a spinning wheel, if you will, which is very, very similar to a ski lift. It's just the same as a ski lift. It's an endless cable, and it starts from the anchorage, and it goes up to the tower, and it goes down across the river, up to the next tower, and down to the next backspan to the anchorage. And at that point, the wire is taken off of this wheel and attached to the eye bars, which are embedded deep into the concrete at the bottom of the anchorages. And this process takes place back and forth, day and night, for how long it takes to get enough wire across to create a cable.
Oh, the steel is about this. That's about 14 inches. And then up there, it looked like this, about 6 inches, you know. And there's no handrail, you know, and it's 690 feet up. And I walked over, and my men came over behind me. The water's a long way down there, you know. So you keep looking at the way you're walking. You don't walk too fast, but you don't scuff along either. You know, you're walking a nice step. Balances everything when you're up in the air like that.
Working on a bridge is a lot different than working on a building or other work that ironworkers do, because Here on the top of the tower at the Narrows Bridge is a very confined space where there actually was 2 derricks sitting up on top of this tower and 2 full crews of men. And you're there day after day after day. It's not like, you're going to spend almost 2 years with these same group of guys in the same spot. To get along with other people, you had to make sure that you could. If you couldn't get along with everybody you're working with, then you had to leave. You had to get out of there. I didn't go to the Narrows until around November of the year, so winter was already coming in. It was probably 2 of the coldest winters I ever spent with my wife. The summer you work in the blazing heat and the sun, and the iron gets hot, and it's tough work.
My husband worked on it, and he used to come home every evening with those little blisters on his knees that I would have to try to break and cure up for the next morning, because they laid all the steel on the bridge. And he came home tired, and of course there was 5 children that needed, as he used to say, food on the table and shoes on their feet. You know, I'd go to 86th Street and I'd look over and I'd see them, you know, working on the bridge there. And I used to say to the kids, Daddy's working over there. You didn't get help at that time from your husband like you get today, because they worked too hard all day. That's the way I felt about it. A couple of the Newfie ironworkers got a little annoyed because somebody had said the work was done by the Indians. But these were Canadian Indians. My husband worked with quite a few of them.
I'm from the Montreal area, and I'm from a reservation on the St. Lawrence River, and that reservation is called Ganawage. I worked on the spinning of the cables and of the binding of the cables. Well, I think I played an insignificant part in that bridge completion. I mean, I only played a small part in that, you know, so many men. We had 12-hour shifts.
And it was pretty safe, that job was, on those bridges, really. We had one man went down, not in the net now. He lost his howitz one day, and he went down 250 feet and he hit the water, and he died from internal bleeding. And it was a sad thing to happen. When this happens, the job is shut down for that day, and everybody go home, they come back and go to work the next day, and it's all, you have to forget about it because you have work to do, you know. I'm from Newfoundland, so a lot of people from Newfoundland worked on those bridges, and I knew quite a few of the Indians. They were great fellows, hard workers. You take a chance. But the Newfoundlanders wasn't like that. They were more careful. But you know, if you have to do your work, you got to do it regardless, you know.
My cousin, actually it was my father's cousin that introduced me to ironwork. He brought me here, and I served my apprenticeship, you know, just carrying rivets and bolts. And my dad was an iron worker. In fact, the majority of men were structural steel workers. He never wanted me to get into this line of work. He thought it was a bit dangerous. It just wasn't a family type of a life, you know. You were here and your wife and children were in Canada, so there was a separation there. He just didn't go for that type of thing, you know.
You only got into one of these locals because you either had a father or a father-in-law or an uncle or a cousin. Somebody had to bring you down and introduce you and get you going and get you in. You just didn't walk off the street and say, I want to be this. Somebody brought you around, and that's the way it was. In the years of the civil rights laws, the government developed a whole new set of rules and regulations for how unions recruit. We had to develop a test or an examination to become an apprentice. And then we had to advertise, and we had to advertise in every paper in the city. My father was an iron worker. All my father's friends were iron workers. That's all we talked about was ironwork and going out on jobs. I went out on jobs with them When I was still going to high school, I'd have a day off, he would take me on the job with him, and I'd hang around, maybe go get the coffee for the guys or something. I was definitely mesmerized by watching these guys put the steel up, and it looked like something that I would want to do. You felt a certain amount of pride, and I think that most of the workers that were there felt the same way, that they felt they were part of something big. The days were always full of something new and something different. Just watching the ships come in and out of the harbor, and it was just an interesting place to work.
Well, I think it's the greatest job I was ever on. Oh yes, without a doubt. It was the greatest. Because it was high, wide, and handsome.
They gave out these medals after the bridge was completed. I have a box with anything special, you know. I have a watch that my dad left me, and I keep it in with there. I have a couple of rings, heirlooms, you know. Yeah, it's special. Yeah.
Every time I cross it, I just say a little prayer for all the ones that helped to build it. And I look at all those bolts that are in, and I think, I wonder how many of them did my husband put in.
Of course I use the bridge all the time, and I think it's so great. But every time I pass the 92nd Street exit, which is where our house stood, I become a little wistful. You know, people using that bridge and using that exit have no idea of the impact that it had on the lives of those people who lived there.
The Safe Bay Ridge Committee, initially, I'm sure, you know, they had some ideas of grandeur that they were going to be able to defeat this. They had all sorts of alternate proposals.
And you'll see Staten Island over the years has grown tremendously. And naturally, it's all attributed to the bridge. Because without the bridge, Staten Island would never have developed the way it is now. Never.
The few times that I've gone across, it's very hard to get through. You see the kind of traffic, and it just gets worse. It's not getting better, it's getting worse.
When they were building the bridge, it was amazing to see half a bridge sticking in the water with nothing holding it up. It was just a sight to see. And we used to walk around all the time by Shore Road just watching them build the bridge. Yeah, it was great. Yeah.
My parents had been there for over 20 years. The tenants upstairs had lived in the house for that length of time. We were a large, almost extended family, knew the neighbors. We weren't especially close to all of the neighbors, but close enough so that if we had remained on the block, you know, the connection would always be there.
During World War II, my mother had a victory garden in the backyard, and so over the years even I remembered lots of vegetables and fresh tomatoes, and so it was a wonderful place to grow up.
Occasionally my father would go to meetings that were held in the community that were protesting the bridge.
The meetings were numerous. My uncle, his name was Nicholas Mackenzie. He was very active in the community. He became involved in the Safe Bay Ridge Committee. Walter Kassenbrock, I would suspect that he was the actual founder. Another very, very active participant was Monsignor Edward Sweeney, and he was the pastor of St. Ephraim's Roman Catholic Church. His concern was that previous and shortly prior to them getting involved in this approach and doing the condemnation, we had just put up a brand new church. So of course the pastor was very, very much concerned with that situation. The one meeting that sticks most in my head, I always recall, was downtown Manhattan. It was very, very well attended. And the position of Bay Ridge was being presented by the Save Bay Ridge Committee, and this was a meeting with the mayor, who I believe at the time was Mayor Wagner. And to my recollections, Moses was there at this meeting. And this was like, you know, like the final shot. And it was very, very heated. I remember Monsignor speaking, and Monsignor was very fiery. He was very upset. Walter Kassenbrock, a fantastic orator. But the one fella who really sticks in my mind is Charlie Bianco. Charles Bianco was extremely upset, and he was losing his cool. And at one point, what he did was he points to the mayor, and he says, "The trouble with you, Mr. Mayor, is you're following the wrong Moses." Well, the crowd went bananas. It went bananas, and the meeting came to a rather abrupt end.
I recall my father saying that there was a lot of grandstanding by some of the elected officials, and he really didn't think much could be done because he felt that the decision had already been made. Subsequently, he found out that the path that was proposed was going to affect only our side of the block. So it was devastating for us.
The biggest alternate proposal was, why don't you just take it along the shore, along Shore Road? You already have the Bell Parkway there. Most of the apartments along Shore Road were expensive apartments because of the view that you had. 7th Avenue were 1- and 2-family homes. Very common folk, right? The working class, middle class. So, of course, there were all sorts of accusations. They were protecting the property interests of those who were the wealthy. You know, they had all sorts of accusations against the people who were proposing this. There may have been some technical reasons why they couldn't have done it, too. Trying to picture it myself, I think it was kind of difficult to do, because they would have to double-deck it to take the type of traffic. The type of traffic would have been horrendous. It had to be Shore Road, or it had to be 7th Avenue. The northern route in no way accomplishes what Robert Moses wants to accomplish. Robert Moses wants to accomplish an interstate access from Brooklyn through Staten Island, through Jersey, which will lead to 95, which leads straight into the interstate.
I do remember that we were one of the last families to move and to leave Dahlgren Place. And that was a very strange experience, walking down and passing the lots where homes of my friends, you know, used to stand. The day that we did move, my sister and my father and my brother said that they were going to go back to Dahlgren Place and see, you know, what it was like. All the windows had been broken by the local kids. And I was so glad that I hadn't gone, because, you know, my heart would have been broken.
I can recall the dirt. The people, just such difficulty keeping their houses clean. I've often said that the Save Bay Ridge Committee was successful. After a while, they said, look, we're not going to beat them, but we have to keep the pressure on. And what they wanted to do was to make sure that they had the greatest number of overpasses. I don't think it destroyed our community in the manner that we thought it would destroy our community.
It took a long time before I think we finally realized that, you know, we wouldn't be able to stay in Bay Ridge, and that, you know, we would have to accept the fact that we'd have to move into another neighborhood. So moving to Bensonhurst was very traumatic for us and difficult.
So many of them moved out of the area completely. A great many, you know, Bay Ridgeites, now Staten Islanders, because there was a tremendous push after the bridge was up.
You did see a movement, a pattern of people leaving Brooklyn and going to Staten Island. As I said, especially when the interest rates were double digits, Brooklyn became unreachable, untouchable. And Staten Island was reachable. If you wanted the American dream, if you wanted a home, if you wanted a yacht, if you wanted good schools, Staten Island was very, very affordable to you. I'm there about 22 years now.
They weren't too enthusiastic about welcoming the people from Brooklyn who eventually inundated Staten Island.
Naturally, you're a stranger to them, and they made you feel like a stranger. When you went into the stores, everything was very cold. Very can I help you? Okay, next. When I lived in Brooklyn, as I grew up in Brooklyn, the area in Bensonhurst in which I grew up was predominantly Italian. So you had your bakery where you walked in and the woman behind the counter would speak Italian or would speak English. You know, they knew you because you grew up in the neighborhood. They knew me as Rosie and Joe's daughter. You know, oh, there's Linda, there's Rosie and Joe's daughter. What do your parents want today? Where my second house was, it was more Irish. It just didn't have the population and the flavor that Bensonhurst had. It's funny because when my daughter was born, my oldest daughter, Lauren, I wanted to walk to the store, as you did in Brooklyn. You put the baby in the carriage, you walk to the store. And as I'm walking to the store, which was maybe about 10 blocks away, people passing in a car would stare at me. One elderly couple actually slowed down and did a double take and looked at me. I mean, I didn't think it was anything strange, you know. I walked to the supermarket, I got my loaf of bread, my container of milk. I put the groceries on the bottom of the carriage, and I walked home. Later, I spoke with my neighbor, and I said, why would people, they were looking and staring at me. Just to me, Linda says, we don't walk in Staten Island. I work in a junior high school in Brooklyn. I know the commute sometimes can be a little hairy, but you know what? I like the school in which I'm in. It gives me that little touch of Brooklyn that I think I kind of still need. The commuting is going to work. It takes about an hour. So I find myself back in my car with my car legs, going from Staten Island to Brooklyn, working, and then coming from Brooklyn back to Staten Island. And I commute an awful lot because my parents and my grandparents and my aunts are still in Brooklyn.
I was only about 4 or 5 when the Verrazano Bridge was built. So I don't remember it being built. I think it's more a reflection of what people tell me about it and how it affected the neighborhood and how it impacted the community in a negative way. I live in a neighborhood where people are passing through or going to work or driving their car. I don't drive. I walk, or I take my bicycle, or I take public transportation, and I feel very strongly about that. If you look at Bay Ridge, it's totally encompassed by highways. You can just look at the map and you see it. It's like choking us. The neighborhood became a way to get on and off of these highways, and the only way to do that was to make these very ugly things in the middle of the neighborhood, these ugly exchanges and dark corridors. And so it was very easy then at that point to say, well, this part of the neighborhood is not so desirable anymore. So for me, it's kind of romantic to think back at the time when there was a ferry that could go to Staten Island.
When you live in Brooklyn, you go to Manhattan, you go to the Bronx, you go to Long Island, but you really didn't go to Staten Island because you had to go on the ferry. It was nice to go on the ferry with your car. That was nice, but just to go there, the bridge made a big difference.
Oh, I believe that the Verrazano Bridge helped us in many ways. Commuting with Staten Island, New Jersey, didn't have to go through Manhattan, through the tunnels, or wait for the ferry. And I wish they would build another one.
I mean, it's a good thing to have, and he's right. We should have more bridges.
Thus, the world's largest suspension bridge.
When the bridge was up, my family was very excited. They're very much for progress, and they saw the bridge as progress, as a way to get from one place to another in a quicker way. So for them, anything that was new and exciting, they were all for it.
We need more than one bridge, because coming across right now, coming back home from New Jersey, we have friends in Jersey, on the weekend you would have to wait maybe 45 minutes to get across that bridge, because there's only one bridge.
It was beautiful. The bridge is beautiful. It's beautiful.
Even though it's a beautiful bridge, there were ramifications in terms of construction and traffic and things like this.
To me, the Golden Gate is minimal compared to the view of the Verrazano. The Verrazano is absolutely beautiful.